The massive galactic council chamber stretched beyond sight, filled with creatures from every corner of the known universe. Beings of crystal floated alongside metal warriors, while energy forms danced between delegates made of living stone. The air buzzed with 1,000 different languages as species that had never shared the same sky tried to communicate through ancient translation devices. Ambassador Kalevox stood at the center of it all, his body made entirely of living crystal that caught and scattered the chamber's blue light into rainbow patterns across the walls. He was tall, even by galactic standards, and when he moved, tiny chimes rang from within his crystalline structure. His forearms gestured gracefully toward the massive holographic display floating above the assembly, showing a detailed map of their galaxy, with one section highlighted in pulsing red. Honored friends and allies, his voice carried perfectly through the universal translators that hung like small jewels around each delegate's communication organs. The great Altarian Empire comes before you today with a simple request. We seek your blessing to expand into Sector 7 Alpha, a region rich beyond imagination. The hologram zoomed in, revealing 17 worlds orbiting various stars, each one marked with symbols indicating valuable resources. Mountains of rare metals, oceans of liquid energy, and forests of crystalline trees that could power entire civilizations sparkled in the display. Our finest survey teams have spent cycles mapping this territory. Kalevox continued, his crystalline form growing brighter with excitement. 17 worlds suitable for our colonies, and enough raw materials to fuel galactic expansion for the next 1,000 years. The region appears completely uninhabited, waiting for civilized beings to unlock its potential. Murmurs of approval rippled through the younger delegates. The Mechanical Confederation's representative, a towering robot, with glowing red eyes, nodded with mechanical precision. The Gas Cloud Collective swirled faster in what their species considered enthusiastic agreement. Even the war singers of Proxima began humming their battle songs of conquest. But high in the ancient galleries, where the oldest and most respected council members sat, a voice cut through the growing excitement like a blade through silk. Elder Counselor Nixara had been alive since before most species had discovered fire. Her people lived for thousands of years, and she was ancient even, by their standards. Her skin looked like old leather, marked with tattoos that told the history of the galaxy itself. "Wait," she said. And though her voice was quiet, something in its tone made every creature in the chamber fall silent. That sector bears the mark of the forbidden. The ancient charts, the ones from before the Great Silence, they mark that space as restricted. Several younger delegates laughed, but the sound was nervous rather than amused. Everyone knew the stories of the Great Silence, that mysterious period in galactic history when the godlike precursors had simply vanished, leaving behind only warnings and empty worlds. Ambassador Kalevox's form flickered slightly, the crystal equivalent of rolling one's eyes. With great respect to your wisdom, Elder Nixara, those are stories from a primitive time. Our modern deep space scanners have examined every planet, every moon, every asteroid in that region. We have found ruins of some ancient civilization. Yes, but they have been dead for millennia. Nothing lives there now that could threaten the mighty Altarian Empire. But Nixara's ancient eyes, which had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, began to glow with an inner light that made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The warnings were not about the dead young crystal singer. They spoke of something alive, something that grew stronger in the silence. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but in the perfect acoustics of the council chamber, every word carried clearly. The old records tell of a young species that emerged from those stars with such terrible fury that even the precursors, beings who could reshape reality with their thoughts, chose to retreat rather than face them. They called these creatures unpredictable, adaptive, and above all, dangerous. Fairy tales, Kalevox dismissed with a sound like breaking glass. The Altarian Empire has expanded across half this galaxy. We have conquered species that breathe fire, and others that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. If some primitive creatures hide in the shadows of that backwater region, they will learn to kneel before imperial might, or they will be erased from existence. The vote was called immediately. Despite Nixara's warnings, despite the unease of some older delegates, the promise of vast wealth proved too tempting. The measure passed by an overwhelming majority. Species after species voiced their approval, eager to curry favor with the Altarians in hopes of sharing in the coming prosperity. As the delegates began to file out, chattering excitedly about the conquest to come, none of them noticed the small object tucked into the shadows near the chamber's highest gallery. It looked primitive, almost crude compared to the advanced technology filling the room. Just a simple metal sphere with basic sensors, the kind of probe that barely spacefaring species might build. But its sensors had recorded everything. Every word, every vote, every laugh of dismissal. Deep in the forbidden sector, in a command center that existed in dimensions the Galactic Council couldn't imagine, Admiral Han Wu sat quietly as the transmission ended. His weathered face, marked by years of preparation and waiting, showed no surprise. He had expected this day would come eventually. "Sir?" his aide asked quietly. "What are your orders?" Han Wu allowed himself the smallest of smiles, one that held no warmth whatsoever. "Send word to the defense grid. After 50,000 years of isolation, it seems we're about to have visitors. Let's prepare to give them a proper welcome." The 3 Altarian ships dropped out of hyperspace like silver, daggers cutting through the fabric of reality. Commander Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Imperial Conquest, watching the stars settle into their normal patterns as the ship's engines cooled from their faster-than-light journey. His crew of 24 worked efficiently, at their stations, their crystalline bodies chiming softly as they moved between control panels. "Begin deep scans of the sector," Veltar ordered, his 4 arms working different controls simultaneously. "I want to know about every rock, every gas cloud, every speck of dust that might be worth mining." But as the sensor readings began flowing across his screens, Veltar's confidence started to crack like thin ice. The numbers made no sense. According to his instruments, entire star systems had been moved from where they should naturally exist. 3 suns that should have been scattered across dozens of light years were now orbiting each other in perfect formation. Their gravitational fields somehow balanced in ways that violated every law of physics he knew. "Commander," his science officer called out, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm reading artificial structures around the 4th planet. They're the size of small moons, but they're clearly manufactured." Veltar moved to her station, staring at the readings in disbelief. The planet below showed signs of massive terraforming projects. Oceans had been carved into perfect geometric shapes. Mountain ranges followed mathematical curves that no natural process could create. And orbiting this impossible world were structures that pulsed with energy signatures his computers couldn't classify. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "Our surveys showed this sector was empty, dead ruins at most." His weapons officer, a young crystal being named Zarthok, looked up from his station with excitement. "Sir, whatever built these things, they must have incredible technology. The Empire could use this. We could reverse engineer their systems and become the most powerful force in the galaxy." Veltar was about to respond when every alarm on his ship began screaming at once. The bridge lights flashed red and his crew scrambled to their battle stations. Through the chaos, his sensor officer's voice cut through the noise. "Single vessel approaching from the inner system. It's small, maybe 1/10 our size, but it's generating energy readings that are making our instruments go crazy." On the main screen, a ship appeared that looked nothing like the elegant curves of Altarian design or the brutal angles of other galactic civilizations. It was sleek and angular, like a blade made of dark metal and light. As it approached, space around, it seemed to ripple as if reality itself was being bent by its passage. Then a voice spoke across all communication channels, clear and precise, speaking perfect Altarian dialect without any trace of accent. "Unknown vessels, you have entered restricted space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions." "Commander." Veltar's mandibles clicked together in what his species considered laughter. The idea that this tiny ship was challenging 3 Imperial warships was absurd. He activated his communication array and spoke with all the authority of the mighty Altarian Empire. "I am Commander Veltar of the Altarian Empire, commanding the Imperial Survey Fleet. By order of the Galactic Council, this sector is now under Imperial jurisdiction. You will surrender your vessel for inspection and prepare to be relocated to a designated refugee area. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Veltar could hear the quiet hum of his ship's systems, the soft chiming of his crew's breathing, even the distant pulse of the star they orbited. When the voice returned, it carried something that made his crystalline skin grow cold. "Commander, you have 36 standard hours to withdraw from human space. This is your only warning." The word human meant nothing to Veltar. In all his years of service, through dozens of conquered worlds and subjugated species, he had never heard of any race calling themselves by that name. The idea that some unknown primitive species was giving orders to the Imperial fleet was beyond insulting. "Human?" He laughed, the sound ringing through his bridge like breaking glass. "I've never heard of your species, creature. Prepare to be enlightened about your place in the galactic hierarchy. You will learn to kneel before Imperial might, or you will be destroyed." What happened next lasted exactly 47 seconds. Though it felt like hours to the terrified Altarian crews, the human ship didn't fire any weapons. It didn't launch missiles or beam destructive energy. Instead, it simply existed near them, and somehow that was enough. Every system on all 3 Imperial ships began shutting down simultaneously. Engines went dark. Weapons powered down. Life support systems flickered and died, leaving only emergency power and basic communications. Veltar stared at his dead control panels in shock. "How? What did they do to us?" His answer came in the form of a woman standing behind him on his own bridge. She hadn't been there a moment before, and none of his sensors had detected her arrival. She was tall and lean, with dark hair tied back in a simple style, and wearing a uniform of deep blue with silver trim. Her eyes were the color of deep space, and when she looked at him, Veltar felt like she was seeing straight through his crystalline, formed to something deeper. 36 hours, Captain Kim Min repeated calmly, as if she was discussing the weather. "After that, we consider your presence an act of war." She turned toward the exit that led to his ship's shuttle bay, pausing only to look back over her shoulder. "And Commander, you really don't want to see what humans consider proportional response." She walked away with unhurried steps, and somehow, despite all his ship's sensors and security systems, she simply vanished between one moment and the next. Veltar and his crews sat in their darkened ships, surrounded by the impossible constructions of human space, counting down the hours until they learned what happened to those who ignored humanity's warnings. The message from Commander Veltar's defeated survey fleet reached the Altarian Empire like a slap across the face of their pride. 3 Imperial warships disabled by a single unknown vessel and sent home with their crystalline tails between their legs. The Imperial court buzzed with outrage and disbelief. Admiral Zexmorth stood before the crystal throne, his massive form towering over the other court officials. He was old, even by Altarian standards, his crystalline body bearing the scars of 100 conquered worlds. His voice rang like struck metal as he addressed the Emperor. "Your Imperial Majesty, this insult cannot stand. Some primitive species dares to threaten Imperial vessels and claim territory that rightfully belongs to us. I request permission to take the 7th Fleet and teach these humans their proper place in the galactic order." The Emperor's approval came swiftly. Within days, 200 of the Empire's most advanced warships gathered at the edge of Imperial space. The 7th Fleet was the pride of the Altarian military, vessels that had conquered entire star systems and brought dozens of species to their knees. Each ship bristled with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Sector 7 Alpha.
Admiral Zexmorth expected to find a handful of primitive worlds defended by whatever crude technology had somehow disabled Veltar's ships. What his sensors detected instead made his crew fall silent in shock. The entire sector had been turned
into something that defied understanding. Where once there had been normal star systems with planets orbiting in natural patterns, now there existed a carefully orchestrated arrangement of defensive positions that spanned light years. Planets had been moved from their original orbits and positioned like pieces on a massive game board. Captain Korthak, the fleet's chief sensor operator, stared at his readings with growing horror. "Admiral, I'm detecting weapons installations on every planetary surface. But these aren't normal defensive positions. The planets themselves have been hollowed out and converted into fortress worlds." On the main display, images began forming that made seasoned Imperial warriors whisper prayers to their crystal gods. Entire worlds had been stripped down to their cores and rebuilt as weapons. Their surfaces crawled with defensive installations that moved and shifted like living things. Energy readings showed power levels that should have been impossible to generate, let alone control. "The asteroid belt, sir," another officer called out, his voice cracking with fear. "They're moving in formation. Perfect formation. They're not natural asteroids at all." Admiral Zexmorth watched in growing unease as what he had assumed were random collections of space rocks revealed themselves to be camouflaged weapon platforms. Thousands of them, each one larger than his flagship, moving with mechanical precision to surround his fleet. But the most terrifying sight was the system's star itself. The massive ball of nuclear fire that should have been burning with random fury instead pulsed with artificial rhythms, its energy being channeled through a network of structures that stretched across the entire system. The humans had somehow turned their own sun into a component of their defensive grid. "This is impossible," Zexmorth whispered. "How long would it take to build something like this? How many generations of work?" His science officer, a brilliant crystal being named Velkara, was frantically working at her station. "Admiral, based on the energy decay patterns, some of these installations are thousands of years old, but others appear to have been completed recently. They've been building this for millennia." Before Zexmorth could respond, a new contact appeared on his sensors. A single vessel, but one so massive that his instruments initially mistook it for a small moon. As it approached, its true size became clear. The human ship was larger than anything the Altarians had ever built, a floating city of dark metal and pulsing energy that made space itself seem to bend around its presence. A voice spoke across all communication channels, calm and professional, speaking perfect Altarian without any emotion. "Altarian fleet, you were warned. Since you chose to ignore diplomatic protocol, you will now receive an education in human military doctrine." Admiral Zexmorth's pride overrode his growing fear. "All ships attack formation. Show these primitives the might of the Altarian Empire." The battle that followed lasted exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds. The humans didn't fight. Like any species the Altarians had ever encountered, they didn't charge forward with overwhelming force or attempt to match the Imperial fleet ship for ship. Instead, they fought like surgeons performing an operation, each action calculated and precise. Weapons reached across impossible distances, bending space itself to strike targets that should have been safely out of range. When Altarian ships fired their most powerful missiles, human defensive systems destroyed them before they had traveled halfway to their targets, as if the humans had known exactly when and where each weapon would be fired. Most terrifying of all were the human fighter craft. They moved through dimensions that Altarian science insisted didn't exist, appearing behind Imperial ships, disabling their engines with surgical strikes, then vanishing back into whatever impossible space they had emerged from. One by one, the ships of the 7th Fleet found their systems shut down. Not destroyed, but carefully disabled, their crews left alive but helpless as they watched their mighty fleet reduced to floating debris and emergency life pods. When the engagement ended, not a single human vessel showed any sign of damage. The Altarian 7th Fleet, the pride of the Empire, existed now only as wreckage drifting through space and a handful of rescue pods containing survivors, whose minds could barely process what they had witnessed. Fleet Admiral Park, So Young's voice reached the survivors with cold professionalism. "You will return to your empire with this message. Humanity claims no territory beyond this sector, but this sector belongs to us absolutely. The next incursion will not be met with such restraint." As the life pods began their long journey back to Imperial space, they carried with them tales of humans who fought with the cold efficiency of machines but possessed a creative ruthlessness. that could only come from minds that had spent thousands of years preparing for this moment. The news traveled through the galaxy faster than the fastest ships. In trading posts on the edge of known space, merchants whispered about the Altarian Seventh Fleet's complete destruction. In the crystal cities of the core worlds, politicians gathered in secret meetings to discuss what this meant for galactic stability. Even in the deepest reaches of unexplored space, ancient beings who had slept for millennia began to stir as the story reached their ears. The ethereal collective had existed since the galaxy was young, back when most of the current star systems were still forming from cosmic dust. They were beings of pure energy, existing in a state between matter and thought, and their memories stretched back through eons that younger species could barely comprehend. When news of humanity's victory reached them, something deep in their collective consciousness began to awaken. In the vast crystalline archives that floated in the empty space between galaxies, energy beings that had not taken physical form for thousands of years began materializing around ancient memory banks. These storage devices, grown from crystals that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, contained records of events so old that most species had forgotten they ever happened. Archkeeper Lumara, eldest of the ethereal collective, slowly took shape as she accessed memories that had been sealed away for 50,000 years. Her energy form flickered and pulsed as she absorbed information that had been deliberately buried in the deepest, most restricted sections of their archives. The files she found were marked with warning symbols that glowed with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. "The Soul Incident," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that made reality itself tremble. How could we have forgotten? Within hours, an emergency session of the Galactic Council was called. Representatives from every major civilization gathered in the Great Chamber, their usual political games forgotten in the face of a threat they were only beginning to understand. The chamber itself seemed different now, older somehow, as if the ancient stones remembered dangers that the current occupants had forgotten. Elder Nixara, who had lived through the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, took her place in the highest gallery. Even she, ancient as she was, felt young compared to what was about to be revealed. The ethereal collective rarely took physical form, preferring to exist as pure thought and energy. When they appeared before the council, it meant something terrible was about to be discussed. Archkeeper Lumara materialized in the center of the chamber, her energy form casting shifting shadows on the walls. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of eons, and every being present felt the truth of her words resonating in their bones. "We remember now," she began, her form flickering as she accessed memories that had been buried for good reason. 50,000 years ago, during the Great Expansion period when younger species first began reaching for the stars, our explorers made contact with a species in what you now call Sector 7 Alpha. The chamber fell silent. Even the usual background noise of translation devices and life support systems seemed to quiet, as if the very air was holding its breath. "They called themselves humans," Lumara continued. "They were primitive by our standards then, barely capable of faster-than-light travel. Their ships were crude, their weapons simple, their technology laughably basic. We approached them with our standard first contact procedures, expecting them to be grateful for the opportunity to join galactic civilization." Elder Nixara leaned forward, her ancient eyes reflecting a growing understanding of something terrible. "What happened, Archkeeper?" Lumara's energy form darkened, pulsing with colors that had no names in any galactic language. "First contact was catastrophic. The humans responded to our incorporation protocols not with gratitude or fear, but with unprecedented violence. But it wasn't simple aggression. It was tactical innovation that evolved in real time as we watched." She paused, and for a moment her form became so dim that several council members wondered if she was going to fade away entirely. When she continued, her voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or perhaps terror. "Every strategy we used against them, they countered within hours. Every piece of technology we deployed, they reverse-engineered and improved upon before we could use it again. They didn't just adapt to our attacks, they learned from them, incorporated them, and turned them back against us with improvements we couldn't understand." The implications of her words settled over the council like a cold wind. Species that had conquered entire star systems began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The precursors themselves were forced to intervene, Lumara said, and several delegates gasped at the mention of the godlike beings who had once shaped galaxies with their thoughts, beings who had created species from cosmic dust and moved stars like children playing with toys, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. From the deepest shadows of the chamber, where even the ancient lighting could not reach, a presence began to manifest that made reality itself seem fragile. The temperature dropped, and several of the more sensitive species began to whimper as something vast and incomprehensible pressed against the edges of their consciousness. The Architect Prime, last of the precursors still dwelling in this dimension, spoke with a voice that resonated through layers of existence that most beings couldn't even perceive. "We made a choice," the ancient voice said, each word carrying the weight of eons. This species possessed something we had never encountered in our travels across the cosmos. Adaptive lethality that grew stronger with every challenge. They were not merely survivors. They were evolution itself, constantly becoming something more dangerous than what they had been moments before. Ambassador Kalevox, his crystalline form now dim with terror, managed to whisper, "What did you do?" "We did something we had never done before in all our existence, Mao," the Architect Prime replied. "We retreated. We gave them space to grow, marking their sector as forbidden. But the restriction was not to protect the galaxy from entering their space. It was to protect the galaxy from what lived there." The terrible truth settled over the assembly like a funeral shroud. Humanity had not been contained or imprisoned. They had been given 50,000 years of isolation to grow, to evolve, to become something that even gods had learned to fear, and now, after all that time, they had revealed themselves to be everything the ancient warnings had promised and more. The greatest fleet in galactic history moved slowly through space toward the edge of Sector 7 Alpha. Ships from every major civilization traveled together under white flags of truce, their weapons powered down and their shields lowered in the universal sign of peaceful intent. The Altarian Empire's crystal dreadnoughts flew alongside the ethereal collective's energy vessels. Ancient precursor ships that hadn't moved in millennia drifted beside the mechanical warships of the Robot Federation. Each vessel in this massive fleet had conquered worlds and destroyed armies. Together they represented the combined military might of the entire galaxy. Yet as they approached the human border, every crew member felt like children approaching the den of a sleeping dragon. Human border station appeared before them like a mountain floating in space. It was larger than most planets, a construction of dark metal and pulsing energy that made reality itself seem to bend around its presence. Streams of light flowed across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and energy readings from the station made every sensor array in the approaching fleet fluctuate wildly. "By all the gods," whispered Captain Velkara from her position on the Altarian flagship. "How is something that large even possible? The gravitational forces alone should tear it apart." But the station held together through technology that defied understanding, and as the galactic fleet approached, docking bays opened that were large enough to hold entire battleships. The delegates boarded their shuttles with the nervous excitement of beings who knew they were about to witness. History Admiral Cho Min-soo of the Terran Defense Force waited for them in a chamber that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 3. The walls displayed not just images, but real-time data streams showing the position of every ship in the galaxy, the status of every major world, even the energy levels of distant stars. He stood quietly behind a simple table, wearing a uniform of deep blue with no medals or decorations, yet every being who entered the room felt immediately that they were in the presence of absolute authority. "Distinguished delegates," he began, his voice carrying perfectly through universal translators despite speaking only in his native language. "You have come to understand humanity's place in the galactic order. The answer is simple, and I will not waste your time with complex explanations." The assembled representatives, beings who had ruled star systems and commanded the loyalty of billions, found themselves leaning forward like students eager to learn from a master. "We have no desire to leave this sector. Admiral Cho continued with the calm certainty of someone stating basic facts. We have spent 50,000 years building everything we need within these boundaries. Your worlds, your resources, your trade routes. None of these interest us. However, any attempt to enter human space without explicit permission will be met with complete annihilation. Archkeeper Lamara, her energy form flickering with nervous patterns, spoke first. Admiral, we must ask about your intentions. Our observations suggest that humanity possesses the capability to conquer the entire galaxy, if you chose to do so. What prevents you from expanding beyond your current borders? Admiral Cho's expression remained perfectly neutral, but something in his eyes suggested vast depths of calculation running behind his calm exterior. Conquest requires desire for territory or resources that we do not currently possess. We have neither need nor want for your worlds. Our sector provides everything necessary for our civilization to thrive. The Altarian ambassador, still bearing visible scars from his species' recent defeat, spoke hesitantly. What assurance do we have that humanity will continue to honor these boundaries? How do we know you won't decide tomorrow that you need more space? The same assurance we have that you will honor them, the Admiral replied with something that might have been amusement. Mutual survival instinct. We have been observing your species for millennia. We know your histories, your capabilities, your strengths and your weaknesses. We understand exactly what each of your civilizations is capable of accomplishing. He paused, allowing the implications of his words to sink in. Every delegate in the room realized that humanity had been watching them for thousands of years, learning their secrets, studying their technologies, and preparing for this eventual meeting. We choose coexistence over domination not because we lack the ability to conquer, Admiral Cho continued, but because we prefer this arrangement. It allows us to continue our development in peace while ensuring that the galaxy remains stable. From the deepest shadows of the chamber, the Architect Prime's presence pressed against reality itself as the last precursor spoke. And if circumstances change, Admiral? If humanity decides that the galaxy requires guidance or intervention? For the first time during the meeting, Admiral Cho smiled. It was an expression that somehow managed to convey both genuine warmth and absolute menace, like sunlight falling on a perfectly sharpened blade. Then you will discover why even precursors once chose to retreat rather than challenge us directly. The formal negotiations took 3 days, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Treaty of Sector 7 Alpha was signed by every major galactic power, officially recognizing human sovereignty over their space while establishing protocols for limited contact and communication. As the delegates prepared to depart, each carried with them the understanding that the galaxy's political landscape had fundamentally changed. Humanity had revealed themselves to be something beyond the normal classifications of galactic civilization. They had turned 50,000 years of isolation into evolutionary advancement, transformed warfare into a precise art form, and made diplomacy into the gentlest possible expression of overwhelming power. As the last alien ship disappeared into hyperspace, Admiral Cho stood alone in his command center, watching the stars. His aide, Lieutenant Yoon Da-bin, approached with a communication pad. Sir, the Council of Earth is requesting an immediate briefing on the negotiations. Admiral Cho nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the distant lights of the galaxy beyond, their borders. Send word to the Council. The isolation period has officially ended. It's time to see what the galaxy has learned while we were preparing for this moment. In the depths of human space, ancient machines that had waited for millennia began to stir. The galaxy had a new equilibrium, and humanity was ready to see how long it would last.